Good day, everyone. My name is Lynn McEntee. I am the host for Youth for Change. Our show is Spotlight on Youth, and our show today is very exciting, actually, but I'm going to introduce you about the values of our program for Spotlight on Youth. Youth for Change is bridging professional role models and community partners in helping youth to develop cohesive, personal, team-oriented, community, and national heritage values, and developing leadership and social skills to become outstanding professionals and members of our communities and countries. We believe all youth can embrace who they are and can define the future and change the world. Part of the underlying core themes today for our show is focusing on mental health awareness, suicide prevention, social justice, and youth empowerment. Today we have affiliates from Directing Change, and I'll just describe a little bit about Directing Change before I introduce our lovely guest today. Directing Change is a nonprofit organization based in California that focuses on youth education and empowering youth voices around the topics of mental health, suicide prevention, and social justice. Now in our 8th program year, Directing Change is excited to expand services to Canadian youth through our partnership with Youth Mental Health Canada, a youth-focused organization in Hamilton. We have some lovely guests here today. Our first guest is our youth representative, Julia Song, and she is a student filmmaker. But I'll just read you a little bit about her bio. I'd love to shine light on who Julia is. Julia Song is a 19-year-old filmmaker and student from Los Angeles, began filmmaking in 2016 when she became a Ghetto Film School LA Fellow. Through filmmaking, Julia helps to voice the narratives of underrepresented stories with authenticity. Julia will be attending NYU in 2021 to study film and history. Julia has been spending her gap year in the Comic Relief U.S. Inaugural Youth Advisory Council, where she will contribute to Red Nose Day grant making along with 7 other youth leaders. Concurrently, Julia has been working in various film productions, including Netflix Nailed It, as well as personal film projects. Julia participated in Directing Change program in 2020 in the Los Angeles affiliate. I'd also like to introduce our second guest, Devin Zaragoza Harris, who is the program manager of Directing Change in Los Angeles. And we have our third guest, Cheryl Boswell, who is the executive director of Youth Mental Health Canada. So I'm very excited to welcome you all here today. Thank you for joining us on Spotlight on Youth in Canada, our national video podcast. Thank you for joining. I'd like to start out, actually, if you don't mind, I'm just going to start out with Devin a little bit. And Devin, if you could tell us just about the inception of the program, please and thank you. We have about an hour period to talk, so we can kind of go back and forth informally in conversation, but really highlighting how it started and perhaps who the partners were in helping you to get that started.
Sure, yeah. So Directing Change was started in California, based in Southern California originally, but always a statewide program. And we were started as an initiative through some state funding. Originally was just going to be like a 1-year pilot program, trying to get youth to talk more about mental health, do really, hosting a film contest about the topics. But as we developed it, we really started seeing, there's a lot of potential here for it to be a long-standing program instead of just like a one-off project for statewide youth. So it started developing into a more robust program, and we really wanted to put, instead of just saying, make us a film about mental health, we wanted to provide a lot more scaffolding around it. Like, how do we educate the youth? How do we use this as an opportunity to really start conversations while also leaving the space for kids to share their stories or share what they feel really passionate about within the topics of mental health and suicide prevention. So over the years, we've expanded the amount of categories and topics that youth can be submitting to. We also became a full nonprofit organization a few years back. So yeah, it's been a bit of a journey throughout, but we've grown every single year, and we're really excited that this year we're able to expand to a whole new group of youth that can talk about mental health in Canada.
So Devin, how long has the program been around?
We have been around since 2012, so we've been around just about 8 years now.
With the program being around that long, what is the age group that you serve?
Yeah, great question. So um, we work with students in grades 6 through 12. So middle school and high school. We're also open to college age youth. And if youth aren't in a classroom, if they aren't still actively students, or if they want to participate outside of a classroom, as long as they're between the ages of 14 and 25, they can also submit a film.
Oh, that's awesome. Would I then get a chance to be able to speak to Julia at the moment where she could jump in and how she entered into the picture for her youth contributions, and then we can kind of double back to you at some point, Devin, as well. Julia, could you tell us a little bit about that? So what age are you at now, and what age did you start the program working with Direct for Change?
I started I guess this year in 2020, when I was a senior in high school. I was applying to colleges and stuff, so I was looking at different, like scholarships and stuff. And there's a scholarship website, and Directing Change came up on it because Directing Change wasn't through my school, for me at least. But I found it through one of the scholarship websites. And immediately I was like, ooh, this sounds like something I want to do, because it was about film and also about mental health, which is just something that's a big part of my life. And especially, spreading those messages through filmmaking is such a big interest for me. So when I saw that, I was like, I immediately knew that it was something that I wanted to do. So the film that I submitted is called Abbreviated Soliloquies. It's a segment of a longer film that I made called Soliloquies, which I made in 2017. And it's just about my experience with mental health. And I chose to sort of do that because I think a lot of PSAs, I wanted my PSA to be a little bit different, showing about like a PSA more about like my experience, because I think a lot of other people can relate to it, because I know that when I was younger and when I was experiencing, when I was coming to terms with having to reach out and ask for help with mental health, I felt very isolated in my experience. So I wanted this PSA to sort of be a look into like the more emotional side of, mental health. And so people know that it feels isolated and you feel alone, but you're really not, because there are a lot of people experiencing it as well.
Then Julia, when you started the program, could you walk us through the process a little bit? Your selection process. You mentioned that you had found it, but where did you find it? Did you find it online? Did someone turn you on to the program? How did that kind of happen? And then what was the process of you being accepted into the program?
Right. So the website that I used is called FastWeb. It's basically just like a scholarship archive thing where it just like shows a bunch of different scholarships that are available, and you put in like what your interests are and stuff, and they sort of sort through a bunch of different scholarships and that tailor to like your interests. So that's
Nice.
how it came up for me. And I knew that I already had that film Soliloquies. So for me, it was, figuring out what parts of that film I wanted to include for the message that I wanted to send. So I edited that and then I submitted it. And I heard back and that I was selected for the nationwide judging. And then I heard that I got accepted as the team pick for the category of mental health matters, which was really, really exciting for me. So yeah, it all happened so fast. But
that's awesome. Yeah, very cool. Could you, if you guys don't mind, Cheryl and Devin, if I could just hear a little bit more about Julia's film, Soliloquies, if you don't mind, and where that storyline sort of took everybody. And then I'd like to maybe jump in with Devin and Cheryl to make some comments perhaps about some different perspectives there as well. Go ahead, Devin, you were going to say something?
Yeah, sure.
Yes.
So just kind of piggybacking off of what Julia said, We really loved Julia's film. Clearly came from a place of, a personal experience and really letting herself be vulnerable and sharing that sort of story. And it's a really beautiful film. As she mentioned, she had created a longer piece for a program that she was part of and kind of pieced it down together because our program, the requirements are 60-second films, which is a bit of it's a tight deadline, a tight timeline, as we hear from our students every year. um, but she tells a really beautiful story about both how life can be challenging, but also can be really beautiful. And taking her experiences to, to learn more things and to open herself up to more things. So we really, the first time we saw it, we loved it. We watched it immediately again.
Wow. Thank you very much, Devin. Well, then, Julia, did you have a mentor along the way in terms of writing, but also the process when you jumped on board with Directing Change? I know there's a lot of resources there available. Could you tell us a bit about that process too?
Right. So as far as the actual film, like soliloquies, when as I said, I made it in 2017 through the nonprofit Ghetto Film School. And there's a summer residency, so I went to NYU in 2017 over the summer, and they were like, make any film you want. It's a personal narrative, and I knew that's the story that I needed to tell at the time. So my mentors were really, the professors there and our TAs. But as far as Directing Change goes, Devin and Stan of Directing Change have really helped me, guide me through these things, and have just opened up so many opportunities for me, just as far as youth advocating goes. They've invited me to speak on different panels about youth mental health, which has been really, really cool to just be able to have very open discussions about mental health with other people that are my age as well. And also just talking about that to not only other students, but also mental health professionals and adults, because I think there's something very special about, the messages about youth mental health coming from the youth. So that's been really wonderful, and they've really helped me. They've guided me to show how to have these discussions more, and just how to have these discussions and teach people in a very open way, which I appreciate.
The vulnerability to put yourself out there is huge, and I just have great admiration for that. And how to do that and how to go about doing that is often the most challenging, for sure. So you speak of these resources, this umbrella that you had, and so you were part of that process. And if you were to talk to us about sort of when you wrote your soliloquy film and when you went through this process with Directing Change, how have you grown as a person through that process prior to joining Directing Change, but also through it as well?
Right. So when I was making soliloquies, that was right when I was diagnosed with ADHD and anxiety. So it was very, very early, in my mental health experience, and I hadn't talked to really anyone besides my doctor and a little bit with my parents about mental health. So it was super, super scary when I was doing that. And when we made our films, we screened them in front of our class. So also just sitting there, and the theater was, my classmates whom I was very good friends with, but I hadn't really shared anything, about my mental health with. It was a very daunting experience. But I sort of used my film when I was writing it. I took that opportunity to sort of, I guess, understand how mental health has affected me and my life up to that point, because I hadn't really thought about it in a deeper level than before making soliloquies. So I sort of, at the time, I made soliloquies for me to understand who I was and how mental health wasn't who I am, but how it affects, you know, how my life experiences and stuff. And since then, you know, 3 years later, when I go through directing change, my experiences with mental health have definitely changed for better and for worse. There are ups and downs, as mental health often goes. But it's shown me how art, I guess, and filmmaking specifically, is a really, really great medium through which to understand these complicated things that happen to you. And I know that just from myself now, I think that soliloquies, when I first made it, I was just so scared of talking about mental health because there's such a taboo around it, which shouldn't be there. Which is why I also just think programs like Directing Change are so important to normalize these conversations, where now I'm able to discuss mental health without, you know, being scared, and I'm able to be more vulnerable and be honest, and yeah, it's less daunting to me now, and I hope those conversations continue so other people find it less daunting as well.
Mm-hmm. When people had a chance to view your film, were there any comments on what they got out of it afterwards? That fear factor going into it, but then having the public viewing of it, what was that like to hear their comments?
Yeah, so it went. So the first day, I remember when I showed it to my classmates, they afterwards, they were all like, "Oh my gosh, like Julia, I didn't even know," and they also said like, I have gone through such similar things too, which was it. I just like I remember just feeling such a big relief like off my chest when I heard that, because for the longest time I felt like I felt like I was going crazy, like I was going through all of these things by myself. And you know, there are a bunch of resources online, but I was like, maybe I don't know if my experiences and what I'm going through right now match what I'm reading, and just hearing all my friends that I look up to, as well as not only people but also artists, just telling me how they were able to relate to it and how they were also going through it, was so wonderful. And my film also screened at another film festival called CineQuest, which is down in Silicon Valley. And I remember like adults who like they came up to me after the screening, because there's a panel afterwards, that, and so they knew who I like, that I made it, and they were just telling me that they really like felt for the experience, and it was just so wonderful to see, you know, that people who were my age but also older than me were able to relate to it. And since making it, and since I've released the film, a lot of people have reached out to me. If they're experiencing things with mental health, I need someone to reach out to. I just love that that they feel comfortable reaching out to me, and hopefully others as well, about mental health, because it's so scary to even ask for help, and take that first step is the scariest to me. And I'm so happy that it's now, I started this film for me at first to understand, but now it's really opened the doors for other people to understand themselves and also take that first step in their mental health journey as well.
Wow, that's huge. Beautiful that you're teaching other people along the way as well, in the circle of life, right? So that's very, very cool. I wonder if this is a good time, if you don't mind, we'll just kind of jump around a little bit, but if you don't mind, Julie, I'll probably come back to you on that. But Cheryl, I'd like to give you a moment to speak, and you're coming at it from the Canadian perspective and trying to introduce a program like this in Canada. You are based in Hamilton, and we have Devin from Los Angeles today, and also Julia, but how important is it for you and to start something like this in Canada and in Hamilton, the area?
Yeah, our office is here, and I just moved here before the pandemic. But our base of support is nationally and internationally. So our reach is far greater than the office location. Well, I think, you know, getting to filmmaking or incorporating filmmaking into mental health and suicide prevention has been something that we've been involved in for the last 5-6 years. In 2015, I reached out to a filmmaker in Newfoundland, Roger Mounder, who had made a 5-minute video called This Video with Amelia Curran and a lot of famous people from Newfoundland. And at that time, there were a few mental health videos on YouTube. So this video really it really reached a lot of people. And it really promoted or inspired a collaboration in Newfoundland focused on mental health in terms of the government really responding to mental health issues and creating a network of support. So I reached out to Roger because Youth Mental Health Canada it actually started in 2013. And so we had tried a number of events. When we had organized events, we had tried different kinds of fundraising efforts, and they didn't work. So I talked to Roger about making a youth mental health film, a video, similar 5-minute video, using cue cards, with, really, and, we were quite excited. So the idea was national and we can involve whatever. And so from there, that 5-minute video idea became a 50-minute film with 150 youth from 3 provinces and many famous Canadians, including Clara Hughes, Mary Walsh, Seamus O'Regan. A lot of people are in the film. And so we thought, wow, mental health organizations are really going to use that film, and really, big things are going to happen, and they didn't. Although I did bring the film to Nunavut, to the Canadian Association for Suicide Prevention conference. So that was pretty exciting because the focus was on Indigenous mental health and suicide prevention. Anyway, all these people came together and wanted to keep working together and to contribute. And these were passionate filmmakers, film students from various universities and colleges. And I felt this responsibility for bringing people together. And from there, I wrote over 30 grant applications, and we couldn't get anything accepted. All these roadblocks, all these obstacles from, all these youth really making important contributions. And that change is really necessary and needed. And so anyway, I reached out to a lawyer, worked with a lawyer. It took almost 2 years to get incorporated as a charitable nonprofit. Continued to write grant applications. And then 2 years ago, I decided, no, we're going to find our own way. I'm an educator. I've taught elementary, secondary, post-secondary adult education in Canada and Africa. I know what's needed. We need to focus on education. I write materials and curricula all the time. There's no mental wellness resources. So we came at education in a different way, although part of our origins are in filmmaking as a really compelling vehicle for mental health education, suicide prevention education. So I met Stan. I had done international research. I had developed a proposal. I talked to government officials about it the last couple of years. I reached out to executive for Art with Impact, Kids Help Phone, and no one was really interested in working together. So 3 years ago, I met Stan Collins from Directing Change because Directing Change was part of the proposal and the information that I included in the proposal. So we've been talking the last 3 years about, working together and possibly doing something similar to Directing Change. I mean, the influence of Directing Change, not just in California, but in the United States has been phenomenal. So in any case, through a Facebook supporter, she recommended us to her employer, and they did fundraising to support us. And we got the donation in February. We had plans before the pandemic that we had to shelve because travel is out of the question. And so I went back to this idea of looking at, can we incorporate Directing Change into YMHC as a pilot program and into a Canadian model? And interestingly, the population of Canada is a little bit less than California. So, I mean, the geographic reach is far greater because it's national and you know, such a large country. But so we have this great opportunity to work together and try and use the successes of directing change as a model for what we can do in Canada.
Thank you. I'll put you on pause for a moment, more or less. And I'm going to go over to Devin for a moment. Devin, thank you very much. That's very informative for the kickstart of the Canadian portion of it. Devin, could you walk us through the umbrella of all that and how it looks nationally, and how many people are involved with it, and how many lives are being touched by it?
Yeah, great question. So as a program, we really are based in California and a statewide program. We did do a pilot program this past school year for going national. Got a little derailed with the pandemic hitting, but we did have some participants from Texas that participated in the spring, which was really exciting. And we do hope to eventually start working more nationally. That pilot was in conjunction with the American Association of Suicidology, because they're really trying to get more conversations about suicide prevention in classes across the nation. But within California, as I mentioned, we've grown every single year. Our first year, the goal was to get 50 films submitted, and we ended up getting about 400, which is wonderful. But every year we get more and more. So this past year for our California program, we received about 1,100. So the past couple of years, we've had over 1,000 submitted, which is also, you know, just another testament to how wonderful Julia's film is. that is the pool that she is going up against. But we reach thousands of students each year that actively participate. I think this past year we were about 2,500 students that were actively involved in creating a film. Maybe closer to 3,000, but beyond the program, the films themselves also have a life of their own. So all of the films are given back into the communities that they came from, you know, as long as there's safe messaging within the films and they go through our own internal process, but they go back to the counties that they came from and are available at the statewide level as well. So they can be used for advocacy purposes and are seen by youth and adults across the state. Both they're used locally on as like PSAs, as TV commercials. We had a film this past year that was selected by Major League Baseball's the Angels team. So in Orange County in Southern California, they were showing a short 30-second suicide prevention animated film from our program at all of their games, and we're highlighting them on like their local broadcasts. They've been used to train teachers in Los Angeles Unified. So they have to watch a couple of those films when they do their annual suicide prevention training. They have to watch a couple of them to really underscore, you know, how are our students talking about it and what are things that our students are dealing with, which is really a big part of this too, is that, you know, there's different ways that people talk about mental health. And the way that a 40-year-old or 50-year-old might talk about needing help or talk about, you know, expressing need for help or extra support, it's going to sound really different than a 15-year-old is going to say it, or an 18-year-old. So having those resources from the youth perspective and using their own language and talking about situations that are really specific to youth life is really important. So yeah, the reach is pretty large. We also, within school campuses, a lot of our schools do events where they do a film screening. They invite parents onto campus when we are in person, or invite them onto the virtual event, and community members. And through that, we know this past year from a set group that we were working with, we had more than 10,000 people were touched just from those events. So really the reach can be quite large, and it can really grow throughout the year. And because we're creating these pieces that can go back into the community, the reach is really endless. Can keep touching more and more people, and starting more conversations, hopefully about mental health and about suicide prevention.
Mhm. Would you mind if I speak to then cross-culturally and intergenerationally the conversations? How does that work in terms of the mandate of the program and trying to reach out to all specters of society, really, cross-culturally, and being able to tell one story?
Yeah, that's a
Yeah.
great question. So within our California program, we do have separate categories. So we have our kind of large scale categories that are about mental health matters, which is what Julia's film was in, or suicide prevention. But we also have specific categories that are looking for those diverse experiences and perspectives. So our Through the Lens of Culture category specifically is asking for films that are about talking about mental health or suicide prevention from the lens of your community. So that could be an ethnic group, getting films, for example, from, the Hispanic community, or as being a Black American, what does it mean to talk about mental health? But we also get films from like the LGBTQ community from that perspective. We'll get films. We also accept them in different languages. So we'll get films in Spanish, Tagalog, Hmong. We get them in American Sign Language every year. So we try and do as much outreach as possible, both through schools, but also for, after school programs, specific groups, and communities, especially if we haven't received a lot of films from those communities before. We really are always trying to build up both all the different languages, because if you now have a new resource in a language that we only have 1 or 2 films from, that means there's a new resource for your community. So whenever we're working with students, we really try and encourage them to talk about, what is your experience and how is your experience informed by the group that you're from your community, whether that is an ethnic group or saying, I live in a really rural town. What does that look like? What does that mean for accessing mental health services? Or what are the conversations like in your community that might be different from what you're normally hearing when you are watching the media about, like, what does mental health mean? So we really try and encourage students to think about, what is your own personal experience, even if you're making a fictional story, even if your film isn't, I have experienced this specific situation. What are the circumstances within your life and within your culture that really inform how people get help? And sometimes it is also, we also talk about this a lot. Within a given culture, it might not just be extra challenges, there might be extra supports. If you're really involved with like a religious group, maybe it's taboo to talk about these things, but also maybe your church has specific programming that's about helping you get more help if you're facing a mental health challenge. So really talking about what are, if you're a really close-knit community, if you are from a Native community, what are healing practices that exist within your Native community that can really help you and that you would want your peers to know about, that they can access as well. So we really try and put a focus whenever we can on getting those different perspectives. And again, really lifting up all of the different youth voices that exist. And for our program in Canada, the submission category is our Through the Lens of Culture for mental health. So again, we are like explicitly really asking students and youth, even if they aren't students, to talk about these things from their cultural perspective, in whatever way they want to interpret what cultural perspective means.
Mhm. Oh, that sounds great. No, thank you for sharing that. I appreciate that very much. It is often difficult to talk about it sometimes in certain communities, and I often wondered about the silence of that and how to empower a youth or how to empower a community to be able to raise that conversation moving forward. And do we start in the education system with that? And perhaps that raises the conversation there. And I'm just going to take a moment to speak to Cheryl about that. And we're coming from the education system as well, Cheryl. Raising those conversations and cross-culturally in our communities, and how important is that to break down barriers for perception, I guess, and accessibility for resources.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty huge. For me as an educator, respecting the brain begins in the, it's an important part of the education system. So yes, must be incorporated. Understanding brain and learning differences, understanding brain health, brain needs, and really supporting the differences, the needs of all students. So starting from elementary school and really incorporating, whether it's social emotional learning, so self and emotional awareness. Young people want to talk about mental health. All people, my students are adult refugees. They want to talk about mental health. It's not COVID that sort of gave us opportunities to talk about mental health, because we can say, wow, we're all struggling. We all recognize the challenges that we're facing. This happened before the pandemic, that, really responding to the needs and interests of students is really important. So finding, compelling ways of communicating and using that as a vehicle for normalizing the conversation, for challenging ideas, for inspiring young people to disclose and creating safe places. Because I think the idea about let's talk, it can set people up for further discrimination. So we need to create, as Devin said, safe messaging. So talk, but talk with safe people in safe places. And so building that support network, the trusted champions, the trusted adults in your life, building sources of strength, that's all part of what we do. And filmmaking is one way of communicating those kinds of messages. And it's the kind of thing that really, I think that a lot of young people in particular gravitate towards. So whether, they're, 10-second, 30-second, 60-second videos on TikTok, or 60-second PSAs through Directing Change, they're already got a lot of training in creating these short videos and really trying to share stories that really capture people's experiences, whether it's your cultural identity, whether it's your lived experience of mental health challenges, or your lived experience of suicide attempts, suicide loss. All of those kinds of things we need to talk about. And unfortunately, where a lot of professionals are giving messages that are really stigmatizing and creating or deepening the taboos and the silencing of these issues by saying there's no evidence that talking about mental health or suicide prevention in any format is healthy, and that there's evidence that it saves lives. And we know that it's quite the opposite, that creating opportunities for healthy discussion of feelings and challenges, and developing the skills and strategies and awareness of young people to really know. I had a 14-year-old boy just call me this morning and wanted to talk about his challenges right now. I said, we're not a crisis support, but, and he said, I'm sorry for reaching out. I said, no, it's important to reach out. I'm a human being. We need to be there for each other. And so, whether you're a crisis support organization or not, I mean, we are not, and Directing Change is not, but that's part of what we do, is provide these ways of supporting young people to manage their mental health and wellness, and to understand that it's okay, it's important to reach out, and that there should be people there who are ready to listen to you and care about you.
Mhm. It's much like managing a healthy diet, learning to manage your mental health, and that it's okay. And it starts at the beginning of life, really. And as we work our way through life, how do we empower ourselves? How do we sharpen those tools as we go and set ourselves up for success with this wonderful network of people and resources that can be in our communities and such. Thank you for touching on that in terms of the education field and perception, I guess, so to speak. Julie, I wanted to loop you back in, if you don't mind. If you could tell us about your story, your film, please and thank you. The extended
Sorry,
version and
I'm
the
sorry. You'll
yeah.
have to,
Oh, that's okay.
is the question like about about soliloquies?
Yes, it could be the extended version or the shorter version, the PSA one. It's up to you. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So the full film soliloquies, I guess so that spring I was diagnosed with ADHD and social anxiety specifically, and then later on I got some more things too. I was diagnosed with generalized anxiety and also depression, but I know that soliloquies really helped me with those experiences too. But as far as the film itself goes, I started it off with a sort of anecdote about when I was in kindergarten. This memory really stuck with me for my whole life, even though it was just such a small thing. But I remember when I was in kindergarten during nap time, they gave us these yoga mats to lay down on, to sleep on. And I didn't realize that now when I look back on it, I realized that I would do this because I was very an anxious child. But I would pick at the yoga mat, there are little bumps on them. And I would pick off the bumps during nap time because I could never sleep or anything. And I remember that my kindergarten teacher one day, afterwards, saw the mat and when we put them all away, and she was like, "Who did this?" And I was trying to when we were putting away, I remember I was trying to hide the little hole that I made. And then the teacher was just like, "Who did this?" Blah blah blah. And then she started yelling, or I felt like she was yelling. And I realized afterwards, I remember someone I think my mom was a lot of times when you're a kid and you're an anxious kid a lot, so it might seem like someone's yelling, but they're probably just speaking normally, but the way that you process it is they're yelling at you. So I think that she was probably just speaking, but I just was oh my God, she's yelling at me. So I opened up the film like that because I think that's just how I was processing how my mental health was affecting my life, and just looking back and seeing how some of the things I remember my heart used to beat so fast when I was little, and I would just have to sit in my parents' room until it slowed down, and I thought that was normal, but it's normal if you're experiencing mental health anxiety and other things like that, but that wasn't the baseline of normal. And I wanted to open up the film with such a small experience from when I was really little, because I think that it just speaks to bigger things, and how really with my mental health, I found out that I had ADHD and anxiety because of school, because I think school just amplified that a lot. For me, I have 3 brothers. One of them is 6, but my other I have one older brother and one younger brother too, who's 15 right now. They both have ADHD and anxiety too, but they were diagnosed very early on when they're in elementary school. So for me, I know that I was I think I'm more of a high achieving person. Not that my brothers aren't, but the way that my mental health came out was that it was able to be hidden a bit more. It didn't impede my school abilities until when I got into high school. And the workload increased, and it was just so hard to keep up, and I would feel so overwhelmed that my mom was like, it happened because, my mom noticed things that I was like struggling to, just do any of my work, and really I was getting so overwhelmed. So she was like, maybe we should just go to the doctor. So I wasn't even the one who reached out because I was so scared. And I remember I would just like, I would mention like, oh, like I think I had a panic attack, but I didn't want to call it that like definitively, because I didn't know what that meant really. And I didn't know how I remember reading things about them online, but I wasn't sure if that really fit what I was going through. So soliloquies is really just me, I guess, describing those experiences and how I felt, and the reason why I did it through film, because I think that, there are many ways to tell a story, whether that's through podcasting or, writing or dance or whatever. I think that film is so special because it combines like music and visuals to sort of show it on a very deep emotional level. So I also used animation as well, because I think that animation is super special because you can really just make whatever you want. Just whatever's in your head, you can put it on to a screen. So for me, it was really important to include that in this film because it sort of helped me capture, what I would be feeling during a panic attack, or how I perceived like life and all these experiences. And I hope it opened a window into how, it offered a deeper perspective into how one experiences these things. So.
Oh, it sounds incredible. I definitely would like to see that. I'll seek that out after our time today. Devin, could I speak to your experience seeing soliloquy and seeing Julia evolve as a person through this process?
Yeah, definitely. So like I said, the first time we watched it, we immediately were really taken with it and could tell that there was, a lot of vulnerability, a lot of sophistication also in how she was telling this story. The animated, but also the visuals and the music. And she has a voiceover where she's talking through all the things that she's experiencing. It's really powerful. But since then, so our deadline is in the spring. So in California, our deadline is March 1st every year that the films are due. And so once we received the film, we have an internal judging process. We train a bunch of volunteer judges to judge films as well before we announce our winners, because there's prizes for the youth and prizes for if they're participating with the school. There's a trophy for the school as well as the students if they place in our contest. But as Julia mentioned, we also, a big part of our mission and what my team really believes in is making sure that we're leaving space, even outside of the films themselves, leaving space for the youth to have more conversations if they want to be working more towards advocacy on mental health and suicide prevention, that we're leaving that space. So over the past, and at this point, I guess it's been 6 months or so, we have worked with Julia and a handful of other students who have expressed an interest in working more on the advocacy side, in creating panels for youth to talk, inviting them with some of our other partner orgs who are hosting events. We always say, well, do you want to have a youth voice on this event? Do you want to, we have this amazing film, but do you also want the filmmaker to come out? Like, we can have them and see if they have anything they want to say, because you can say so much from a film, but you can also learn a lot more if you have the person who created the piece of art sharing why they created it, or maybe the process that they went through as they were creating it too. So because we do have students and youth who come to us in a lot of different ways. So for example, so Julia had created a longer version of this film before, but we also, a lot of our students get involved because they have a teacher who signs on. and we'll do education around mental health. And then they'll create the films there. And when you have more of a captive audience in that way, sometimes kids weren't super passionate about the topics to begin with. They were saying, I had to make a film anyway, I guess I'll make it for this topic, which is fine. You know, we don't all have the exact same passions, but so often we end up receiving feedback directly from the kids, whether it's that year or we get emails and letters from past students years ago who will say, you know, I had never had a conversation about mental health. And when I first started making these films, I was like, it's just another school assignment, or it's an assignment that I'm doing because I could possibly win some money from this film contest. But I learned a lot and I internalized a lot of the messages that we were talking about. So, you know, how I should be talking about mental health when I'm with my friends. And if somebody says something that's like stigmatizing, feeling that in myself and saying, okay, we shouldn't be saying it like that. You know, like people really struggle with these topics, and people thrive, even if they do have a diagnosis, or if they don't have a diagnosis, but they're dealing with a mental health challenge. Like, you know, people wait a long time because there is so much stigma. So hearing from students who even weren't super excited about it before, but seeing them really find, you know, their voice about this topic, we try to push them up as much as possible. So with many of our youth, but, you know, specifically with Julia as well, we've seen how they have developed, you know, a lot of their own ideas and like, what is their central message that they want people to know about mental health or about suicide prevention. So that could be something like, you know, I waited a long time before I got help. So maybe we should be talking about this so people aren't so scared, so they get help earlier. And it's really different for every student, of course. But we've seen a lot of growth over the years, and that's something we really are passionate about within our program, that we don't just start these conversations with youth or say, hey, make a film, and then we will never talk about it again. You've made a film, you might have you know, unearthed some feelings within yourself, or maybe this is the first time you've talked about this with a greater population outside of your best friend and your mom. And that's a scary thing. So what can we do to help continue to help you grow? Like, where do you want to be? And so what can we do to help you along that path?
Would you mind if I ask about some of the mentors that are involved and volunteers that you mentioned, and other perhaps mentor filmmakers?
Yeah, great question. So within our program, our largest group of volunteers are our judges. So we train them every spring on messaging around mental health and suicide prevention. So they're going to be watching all the films that the youth produce. And they help us decide, I mean, their largest role is they're helping us decide who wins, right? And we have a specific judging form, or like a rubric, that the kids, they get more points if they do this, they lose points if they do this other thing. Pretty straightforward. But beyond that, it's really also about training these adults. So within the rubric, which is why we host a training ahead of time, it's about, you know, what are the things you should be looking out for, learning things like, for example, you know, we try to discourage people from saying the phrase like committed suicide, because there is a lot of stigma associated with the word commit, because that has to do, usually brings to mind ideas of, you know, sin and crime. So that sort of messaging, we have our students, we say, don't use that sort of phrasing within your films. But when we're working with our volunteer judges, we also want them to know that. We say, this is part of it, and this is, you know, the reason behind it. And here's the research that has been done about some of the different messaging pieces that we have. So we are training these adults from different backgrounds about messaging around mental health and suicide prevention as well while we're doing this. And I would say about half of our judges come from the mental health field. So they might be, school psychologists, local county behavioral health workers that we either know or that they've heard about directing change and they want to get involved somehow. So we have a lot of people from the content areas, so mental health and suicide prevention work professionally. We also have some people who have lived experience, who have an interest in talking more about mental health and suicide prevention. And then we have a good portion of our judges are actually from the entertainment industry. So we have judges who have been producers, directors, writers, animators, kind of all across the board, who also volunteer and help with us. We had a connection with Cartoon Network for a while, so we got a lot of animators signed on through that. And one of the great things too about this is once people start working with us as judges, they often stay. They come back every year and they say, I want to watch more of these films. I want to see what the kids have produced every year. Literally every year we get emails saying they've gotten better. How do they keep getting better? I watched last year and I was like, these are amazing. And now you sent me these new ones this new year, and how are they even better? And through that, through like our judge recruitment, and through different experiences we've had in sharing these films in different places, we've also developed some strong partnerships with some people in the entertainment industry who sign on for more of like the mentorship role throughout the process as well. So we have like a documentarian and an executive producer who often sign on and do a lot of our events with the youth. So this past year we did an event called like the Director's Cut. So we brought on a bunch of different students who would share their films, and then they were being, watched by people who work in the entertainment industry, and they gave them a lot of feedback about like, okay, you did such a great job with this sort of lighting, or my favorite thing was how you did this, like how you set up your story, and got a lot of feedback in that way. And we're looking, we're always looking for more ways to get people from the entertainment industry who are on the film side of it involved throughout the process. So if that is after both like judging the films, afterward lifting up the films and the filmmakers themselves, but also earlier in the process, helping us to develop some of our curriculum around filmmaking, and then working in this virtual world, trying to balance how we can do this exactly, but working with a group hands-on, saying, okay, I'm happy to start looking through or doing a guest lecture for your class, or how do we start working on, reviewing early drafts, and I can help you with like more of the filmmaking side of it. So it's always an ongoing process, but there are wonderful people out there who are really passionate about mental health and passionate about working with youth, and providing their expertise in this way. So we've been very lucky to develop some of those relationships over the years.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Devin. I really appreciate that. And Cheryl, then how do you see that applying this type of model to the Canadian version of the programming?
Okay, that's a good question. Well, I'm also a member of the American Association of Suicidology, and I have been for 3 years. So they are all part of my community, and a number of them have signed on to being involved in Directing Change Canada, and they also want to make it successful here. They really believe in directing change, and because I've worked with them in a variety of capacities, they want to make this model successful here, which is great. Of course, filmmakers that I've worked with in Canada are also involved. So last year, there were 2 Cypher series that were developed by Ken Galloway and a team of people. Last year it was stories from caregivers, and this year was letters from caregivers about essential workers in the pandemic. Last year it was mental health caregivers. So one of the series was focused on me and Youth Mental Health Canada, so punk rock mental health, because and punk rock.
Nice.
And mental health needs more punk rock, definitely. So that's great, you know, that the relationships that have been built up over the years, you know, I mean, this is an exciting way to be involved, and there's so many ways that people can be involved. And I think, you know, we're seeing great success in British Columbia where, you know, someone high up in the Ministry of Education really supports this model and really advocated for schools to participate. That hasn't happened in other provinces and territories. So when you see somebody with real leadership taking on youth mental health and youth suicide prevention, what can happen is incredible. So we have these schools that have really thought very comprehensively about infusing mental health and filmmaking through their curriculum, cross curricular, and also providing community promotion and supports. So, you know, there are amazing ways that we can take a film, a mental health and suicide prevention filmmaking model, pilot program, and incorporate all kinds of people as resources going into the classroom, whether it's filmmakers or directors or producers or storytellers, mental health advocates, people with lived experience telling their stories, and using narrative storytelling as a vehicle for filmmaking, and using the expertise of people in the school system. So, you know, those resources and doing collaborative work in schools and in school boards. So I think there's a lot of wonderful opportunities. I think we were just beginning. So, you know, getting the word out there, really people starting to support Directing Change Canada and signing on and really sort of thinking through a process of being active participants in the program. So it's our first year. It really requires, you know, people getting on board to you know, with vision, with, you know, an eye to potential and what we can really do with this program.
Can you walk us through the timeline a wee bit, if you don't mind, please, and thank you.
Sure. We launched in September, so news release went out across Canada. I think that's actually how you found out about us.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, so that's great. And so there was a mini grant program, a competition that the deadline was in October. So that's where so many schools from British Columbia got involved and made submissions. So we'll, you know, be focusing our energy on those schools who really thought through things and keep promoting this to all schools across Canada, really inviting them to take part. We did send information out to all schools in Canada, elementary, secondary, post-secondary, public and private, and all school boards in Ontario. So, you know, the word's getting out there. I mean, we're communicating what's happening. We need to follow up with trying to contact people who can really make decisions and influence what happens in schools and school boards. So, you know, that's the next step, is really, you know, making personal contact with people in the, you know, that can really influence making this a success in Canada.
If someone was hearing you talking now about that and they wanted to reach out to the Canadian portion of it, with it just getting started, what are your immediate needs? Everything, or, you know, funding?
Oh, well, that's a good question.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, interestingly, you know, I mean, people are looking at the pandemic and saying, wow, you know, and there's this sort of alarmist, crisis-driven response from the media. Oh my gosh, young people, you know, they're all experiencing mental health challenges. The, you know, suicide rates are going to go up. But the really proactive approach isn't happening in Canada. So, so I wrote a COVID mental wellness journal workbook this year, which is an excellent book that incorporate skills and strategies and reflection and, using best practices in mental health, like social emotional learning and cognitive behavior therapy and dialectical behavior therapy. So that's a proactive way. Directing Change Canada is a proactive way. So, fortunately, we're getting people who are looking at, so corporations looking at ways that they can really support youth mental health. And so a couple of weeks ago, I got a email, can we chat? Okay. And I didn't know anything about this organization, but I found, soon learned that they're a global marketing firm with, many, many locations throughout the world. And so they had a competition this week, 37 teams of 5 people. So their pitch, the winning pitch was to promote Youth Mental Health Canada through focusing on family engagement. So, if we're at home and we're spending a lot of time at home, whether online learning or hybrid learning or whatever it is, it's that parents can play a pivotal role. And that's what Youth Mental Health Canada is about. It's not just about youth involvement, youth engagement, youth-led, youth-driven. It's about family engagement and community engagement, because it's going to take all of those layers of engagement to make real change. And so they wanted to focus on family engagement and then use something that has been, well received, Animal Crossing, and doing cross promotion and really, working together on how can we use video gaming and something that has been widely popular, selling 40 million games, and, something that young people are using, and create toolkits. And so there's all, and that's, we have, our books are tools for wellness and, being proactive. So I they're hoping to raise $200,000 through the promotion. So that will guarantee that we can continue Directing Change Canada another year, which is pretty exciting. So, I mean, people taking action and really looking for who's doing what. We've always been online. We have the largest online mental health platform in Canada. We're on TikTok. We're the only mental health organization on TikTok. So the director of TikTok Canada reached out to us and wants to promote us, which is great. We have a big team on TikTok that are making amazing videos. Our Facebook page is 126,000. We have 4 Instagram accounts, 1 in Spanish, 1 in French, 1 international, because we're doing multilingual infographics, memes, Insta live chats, those kinds of things. So we're, our base of support has always been online, before the pandemic and because of the pandemic. We have a huge base of support from Indigenous communities, not just in Canada, but the US, Australia, New Zealand. 20% of our following is Indigenous. The people who purchase the resources in the biggest quantity are Indigenous communities, especially in northern BC, Manitoba, Ontario, and Quebec. So, and they want to also, one Indigenous bookseller wants to distribute our books in their catalog. So, there's great things that are happening. It's just really, we've been doing amazing things for years. A lot of people aren't familiar with Youth Mental Health Canada, maybe because, I don't know, youth mental health is really just a topic of conversation for most people in the last 2 years. So really, I think we want to get from talk into action. And that's where we see this big gap, that there's not enough action. There's not enough real understanding of how to approach youth mental health challenges. So we sort of rest with the family blame or the young person blame, and we don't really look at collaboration. We don't look at creating education support teams. We don't look at family support. We don't create a needs-based model. We don't have a youth suicide prevention strategy in Canada. We don't have a Disabilities Education Act in Canada. We don't have publicly funded educational accommodations that will really meet the needs of students with mental health disabilities who are not able to attend school. So there's a significant part of our population that lose their education. And, now we're talking about all young people in a pandemic, losing their education or the quality of education. But for a significant part of the population, they have, they've experienced this and there hasn't been any response, not on a school-wide basis or school board level, not provincially, not territorially, and certainly not nationally. So, we see huge gaps and, in making systemic structural societal change, it takes a lot of action. And, Directing Change Canada is about action. And that's where we're not just talking, but we're looking at films that inspire change, that inspire hope, and that start, looking at, well, what do we need to do about this? So I think Directing Change in California, it started as a filmmaking contest, but it's gone far beyond that, where it's, been incorporated into other vehicles for communication, whether it's on television or before films, or as Devin mentioned, sports, and then it inspired the rest of the nation to look at what they're doing and if there's ways that they can incorporate it, whether it's through American Association of Suicidology or other youth models. So I think we need, in the world, we need to take more action. We need to find, creative ways, needs-based ways of really focusing on young people and how to really, as we say, and it's become sort of a cliche, but build lives worth living. That make hope happen. Don't just do this, but go beyond. And how are we going to make it happen that young people want to stay in a world where a lot of things are pitted against them, and where it can be growing up with birth trauma or life trauma, intergenerational trauma, and that feeling that nobody cares, nobody understands, and that you just meet with obstacle after obstacle. And how can we build the protective factors, because so many people just see an increase in risk factors. So and if people are turning their backs on young people, that's in effect what we're doing.
Well said, absolutely well said. Thank you so very much for that, Devin. We have about 5 more minutes in our programming today, and I wonder, Devin and Julia, if you could just be on standby for a moment. Devin, I guess I wanted to ask you about the resources at this point. If someone was seeking out resources in terms of their needs as a youth, perhaps even a community member who's an adult, what are some of those umbrella things that they could seek out, and where can they find the shining light, and where would you recommend they find the shining light on all of this, if you will?
Sure. So within our organization, a lot of our resources are really on the educational side. So we have lesson plans that that teachers can use, PowerPoints. For the larger community, we also have brochures, and we do webinars, sometimes trainings in person, but currently a lot of online trainings for parents, for providers talking to youth, to start having these conversations, as well as specifically within suicide prevention, a lot of information about how do you recognize warning signs. So a lot of kind of gatekeeper training, but outside of that, we really do push a lot of the local resources. So in the United States as well as Canada, there are crisis lines that people can talk to. So that can be a phone call, a text. Oftentimes they have an online chat version too, just depending on what people feel the most comfortable based on their situation and, you know, your favored communication style in general, if you are looking for help. And we really push those resources throughout our educational resources and any sort of programming we do. We make sure that people have that phone number. So it's the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline here in the United States, or Kids Help Phone in Canada, that there are resources that people can talk to if they are currently in crisis. But a lot of the work that we do beyond, you know, sometimes somebody isn't in crisis right this second, but they're looking to reach out for help, saying, you know, either being proactive or saying, I'm kind of worried about a friend. I don't think they're like in major crisis right now. One, you can still call those crisis lines. We like to really tell people, you know, you don't have to be currently in crisis and talking to somebody that's currently in crisis to make that phone call. If you are saying, I think I'm worried, I want to talk to someone, those are available. But there's also a lot of local integration that we do, especially here in California. So we have ties, you know, to local resources. If somebody reaches out and says, you know, I'm in this part of the state, what does exist around us? We have been working in partnership with county behavioral and mental health departments for years. So we know a lot of what is going on. So we are a good resource for that. If they're saying, you know, either I want to go and get help, so we can connect them to someone, like for example, in Los Angeles, we have Dee Hirsch. So they do a lot of trainings, they run a lot of their own hotlines, so we can connect them that way. But also if somebody is saying, I want to do more advocacy work, or if I want to be involved more with specific groups, for example, like, you know, if somebody is like a loss survivor from suicide, we have connections to groups that are specifically with that. So really depends on what you're looking for, but we like to make sure that even if we aren't the resource specifically for you, that we can help connect you to somebody that is closer to what you need and what you are looking for, either in your community or a specific need based on your circumstance. So we try and be that connector whenever possible.
If there were during this pandemic, if there was a youth out there who wanted to conversation to speak with another person who's maybe gone through this before.
Sorry, could you repeat that? You kind of stopped for a second.
Yeah. For sure. If a youth during this pandemic, if another youth wanted to reach out to someone who's been involved in the program before, just for a conversation about what they've experienced, is there an opportunity for them to do that?
Yeah, that's a good question. We definitely can facilitate that. Oftentimes we do have a student that is interested and will reach out to myself or someone else on the team asking about how do we get started. And so a lot of times that involves, you know, like I hop on a call, or we try and identify an adult on campus who can help facilitate, you know, provide a little bit more local support in creating a film and getting started. But we're always happy to answer questions. And if they do have an interest in talking with a past participant, we can always, you know, ask around, see if someone like Julia or somebody who's participated in the past, or especially if somebody from their school or from their neighborhood has participated, see if we can, with their permission, connect them.
Thank you very much. I'm going to hold on Julia for a moment. I'll hop over to Cheryl. And Cheryl, if someone wanted to reach out in terms of getting in touch with your organization, in terms of the resources, what resources, I guess, where would you lead them to at this point if they wanted to get involved as a youth, as a participant community member, whichever, what is available to them right now? Where could they go and find that?
Okay, well, we have 3 websites. The main one is youthmentalhealth.ca or www.ymhc.ngo. We have an education website, which is edu.ymhc.ngo. So on the education, so there's a link on the main website to resources, and then it'll, the first link will take you to the education website. So there we have our 5 resources. I believe those resources need to be in the hands of all young people in all schools, in all families. You know, that they're not just designed for a young person who's struggling with their mental health, let's wait, but, you know, really proactive, real sort of change makers in that kind of a way. And then we have the third website, which is www.ymhc.directingchange.org. So through that, and so through the 3 websites, but you know, I think the you know, depends on what social media platform people prefer. But I think in terms of being, you know, getting most information about our workshops, about, you know, all kinds of things. We have 3 peer support services. So we have a compassionate card service. It's ymhc.ngo/CCS. And then we have a daily message of support. People can register and, you know, get a daily message of support and compassion in their inbox. And we've just launched an Indigenous compassionate card service led by an Indigenous peer support team. So, and all of our services are open to people of all ages and backgrounds, you know, except for the Indigenous services meant for Indigenous people. So yeah, I mean, all the information is through our Facebook page, probably most, you know, the best way, you know, but Instagram depends on what platform people feel more comfortable with. But yeah, we're on all social media networks, so that's probably best. Yeah.
Thank you, Devin. Where would people get in touch with you?
Yeah, great question. So we are also on pretty active on social media. So you can look us up on Facebook for Directing Change CA. It's where a lot of our information comes through, and we'll have some of our Canadian information as well. We'll be going out through that. We are pretty active on Instagram as well, which is just Directing Change, and Twitter. But you can also feel free to go to our website that has all of our resources. So if you are looking for lesson plans, if you're looking to go through past films that have been created, they're organized by year. So currently the films that are up are the ones that won this past spring, but you can go back to 2019, 2018, 2017, look up a specific part of California saying, I want to look at this county and these sorts of films. Those are all available on our website as well. So that's just directingchangeca.org. And you can navigate through that for whatever sort of resources you're looking for. We're also happy to, you know, schedule a call with anyone in the virtual world. Now, location doesn't matter as much, so we can hop on a Zoom. Happy to hop on a call or an email as well. And all of our contact information is also available on our website. It's probably the most direct way to get to us. So that's, again, just directingchangeca.org.
Okay. Great. I'll jump over to Julia for a moment. Julia, words of wisdom for other youth who would like to get involved in this program. Why?
I would say, you know, if you're even mildly interested in participating with Directing Change, just go for it. Even if you've never made a movie before, just do it, you know. All you need is a camera, and like that's really it. I know that I made soliloquies just using footage from my phone, and also like some archival footage that I found online. I think that, you know, films specifically are so daunting to people, especially if you're just first starting, because you know, filmmaking isn't something that's taught in school, like in an art class. So it seems very much like oh, like that's a grown-up thing, like I can't do that, that's for the professionals. But really, like, all you need is a video camera, and that's it, and that's all a movie is. And, you know, even if, as far as like mental health advocacy goes, having these conversations are incredibly important. And the first few times that you have these conversations can be uncomfortable, and that's also okay. It's not supposed to feel easy. And if you are feeling uncomfortable, then you're probably having the conversation correctly, because part of it is opening yourself up to others, which never feels like, you never feel perfectly comfortable doing that. And you know, ultimately the way to make changes through conversation, whether that's you know, conversation through a discussion like this or through films. It's really important to have.
That's awesome. Thank you. Words of wisdom, Cheryl, for anyone wanting to participate in this program.
Wow, words of wisdom. You know, that there are people who are passionate about making change, about supporting people, and really responding to the individual needs of young people. And I think with that sort of sense of passion and determination, that's how we'll make change.
Very nice. And Devin, please and thanks. Words of wisdom for anyone interested.
Yeah. Well, I guess just first starting just with a reminder, it is free to participate, doesn't have any cost. And there's cool things you can win. So on a very base level, there's, you know, really cool opportunities that come up with it and prizes. But beyond that, knowing that whatever you create has a lot of power. It has a lot of potential for changing conversations, for changing the world around you that you see. So just knowing that anything that you are making could be really improving your community and improving the lives of people that you don't even know. So knowing that there is a lot of potential in what you have to create, and the sort of stories that each person tells is the story that only they can tell. So really, you know, if you have the time, if you have any interest at all, I say go for it. Just like Julia mentioned, you know, you don't need that much. I'd say most of our films at this point, and especially this year, are going to be made on a smartphone, or with a webcam like this from your laptop. And it doesn't have to be, you know, you don't have to have the most amazing equipment to make a really powerful film.
That is so awesome. My goodness, thank you so much. I'm just going to take a moment to wrap up. I've just had such a joyful time with you today, just learning and growing together as a community. My name is Lynn McEntee, and this has been Spotlight on Youth. And Spotlight on Youth is really all about educating and promoting cultural exchanges between businesses and community and youth members. And should you want to get in touch with me and you have an idea for a show upcoming, you can get in touch with me at lynn@youthforchange.ca. We're all about stepping outside the box and shining light, and it has been my pleasure today to shine light on Julia Song, Devin Saragosa Harris, and Cheryl Boswell, our representative from Canada. Thank you so much for joining us from Los Angeles and Canada. Bye, everyone. Thank you, friends. That's awesome.